Okay, so here's a recap of the symbolism lesson that we did on Monday. So, what to do if you missed a lesson. First of all, be looking out for the emails that I'm sending out each day we have class that explain what we did and give you the documents that you need. Also be looking out for the emails that I send on Friday with the links to these videos. Okay, so the symbolism lesson, and again, anything that we do, I'm going to make sure you have available on Blackboard. So you're going to look at figurative language, click into figurative language. Metaphor we haven't gone over yet. Symbolism is what we did. So you're going to click symbolism, and then this is what comes up. Once you have this up, it's pretty straightforward, and I'll go over it with you. And so there's not anything due this week, the first week of April, to do with symbolism, but we are going to be talking about symbolism in figurative language as it has to do with Handful of Dates, and as it has to do with the rest of the stories for the semester. And so briefly, I won't highlight everything on here because you guys can go over it in detail on your own, but I'll define what a symbol is in terms of literature and also what symbolism is in literature. A symbol is a concrete image or object that stands in for a more abstract concept. The example that I like to give for this is the example of a traffic light. So if you're driving along and you see a red traffic light, you are going to stop. And most often you're going to stop without even really having to think of the whole reasoning behind the process. The traffic light is a symbol. There's nothing about the color red that makes you automatically stop the car. But it's because when we see the color red in that context while we're driving, then we know that when a red light comes on, that means we have to stop. So that's a symbol. It's a concrete image. It's a concrete object, meaning it exists really in the world as an object. But it stands in for a concept that is more abstract, stopping your car so that other cars can go. So another example is the symbol that you see on the screen here. This obviously is the peace symbol. In most places of the world, you will recognize that this circle with the lines drawn in it stands in for this bigger idea of peace or even world peace. There's nothing about this circle in itself that means peace. And it kind of looks like a pizza that was cut unevenly. But it's just really a circle with lines in it. And that's really all it is. But it's a symbol because the concept or the idea that it conveys or that it communicates to us is of an abstract idea of world peace, of peace. So that's a symbol. Can you list 5 symbols that you recognize in everyday life? Business logos, symbols that appear on uniforms, like a police uniform or an EMT, a medic's uniform. The arrows that you see just walking around. If you see, for example, you're walking on the street and you see a sign with a red circle, and within the red circle is the white number 2. We who have spent a lot of time in New York recognize that as a subway sign. So That's just one brief example. So can you think of several examples of symbols that you see walking around everyday life? So symbols obviously appear also in the works that we read. So I'm going to give you guys a sentence that you see right here. And this is really talking about the process of how do we start figuring out when we're reading something if there is symbolic value and what the symbolic value is. So first, before we get into symbolism, we have to think about literally what's happening in the sentence, what's happening in the story. Because if we don't know what's happening in the story, it'll be difficult for us to ascertain or to figure out what is going on another level. And furthermore, symbolism and figurative language is almost always tied to and related to literally what's going on. So let's look. Outside, the clouds were clearing up, and the sun shone down on our yard. In the bird bath, a robin opened its wings and danced. So, literally, what's happening in this sentence? So, literally what's happening is it's a cloudy day, but the clouds are clearing out and the sun is coming in, and in the yard there's a bird taking a bath. That's literally what's happening. But say, for instance, this was the last sentence in a story. Especially in that case, we have to think, okay, the author is choosing to leave us with this image. And so we have to think that it has something to do with more than just the weather, more than just a bird taking a bath. There's got to be some deeper meaning to it. So how do we figure out what that is? It's through analysis. And we're going to analyze it by breaking it down into different parts. So the clouds. First, we have the cloudy weather that the sentence starts out with. So now we have to think of what is the symbolic value for clouds. So the clouds could mean several different things, but you have to think, how do you generally feel when it's a cloudy, dark day? It kind of tends to feel a little bit more sleepy, maybe even a little bit depressing or something. And additionally, if someone says there are dark storm clouds on the horizon, a lot of times that means that there's trouble coming, or there's some dark force moving in. So clouds generally are sort of a dreary, a little maybe sad, a little bit depressing image. But in this example, the clouds are clearing up, so the clouds are going away and the sun is coming in. So the sun, by contrast, is bright, generally represents hope. It represents illumination, knowledge, happiness. And so in this sentence, we're going from darkness and depression and hopelessness into hope and happiness and warmth and light. And then additionally, we have the bird, the robin, opening its wings and dancing in a bath. When you see a bird in a story, you want to pay attention, because writers for a long, long time have been using birds as symbols. If you see a dark bird, like a crow or a raven or a vulture in a story, it could mean an omen of death. It could mean some sort of darker image or symbol. But if you see a dove, obviously a dove is linked to peace or to divinity, or depending on which religious tradition, the Holy Spirit or something like that. In this image, it's a robin taking a bath in the sunlight. And it says it opens its wings and dances. So a bird in the story often has to do with freedom, because a bird has wings. It has the ability to fly away. So birds tend to be messengers in stories. Birds tend to, again, stand in for liberty or freedom. And so really, if we put all these three things together, the image of the bird in the sunlight is meant to make us feel happier. It's make us feel like we're moving from a place in the story where there was more uncertainty or even depression or dreariness into a place where there's more clarity, more light, more celebration, more dancing. And so you can see we went from a statement about the weather and an observation about a bird bath, and now we're thinking of resolution in the story. Now we're thinking of the deeper meaning of the bird and the weather. Obviously, if we had more context in the story, we would be able to know more. So this brings us to symbolism. Symbolism is when an author uses symbols to intentionally add layers of meaning to the text. It's a simple definition of symbolism. So a key point here being that when writers write their works, they don't just kind of sit down at the typewriter and then pump it out and send it to their publisher and then that's it. It goes through several different drafts, several different things. So by the time you get to reading it, you can understand that there's been a long process and the writer has decided to keep in the images and the language that you see there. So this word intentionally is important, because whatever image you see in a story, whatever language you see in a story, the author left it in there for a reason. So symbolism is the use of symbols, the intentional use of symbols in a story to add layers of meaning. For example, if there's a character that always wears a black hat, it could mean that they're supposed to be seen as a villain. So there is this darkness that's immediately associated with their personality if they're wearing a black hat. Say if you're watching a Western or something, the bad guy usually wears a black hat. So he brings the darkness with him. He wears the darkness. If a character always folds her arms and crosses her legs, this could mean that she's a closed-off character, that she has something to hide, that she's more reserved. And again, literally all that would be happening is that she's crossing her arms. But symbolically, crossing your arms has a deeper meaning. And we have to figure out what the character themselves has to do with this behavior. If a character claims not to care about an ex-lover, but has kept all of the notes and gifts from that person, keeps them in a special box, what could that mean? Literally, it means, okay, there's all these memories of this other person kept in a box, physically in the house, but it could also mean that this is a character who has difficulty letting go of the past. So again, symbolism, the use of concrete objects in a story to stand in for a more abstract idea of a character that has trouble moving on. So when we look at symbolism and when we analyze it in a story, again, we have to look at context, meaning we have to think about what's the major conflict in a story. What type of character are you dealing with? What are they afraid of? What do they want? What are they after? So how you analyze the symbolism in a story depends on the nature of the story that you're reading. What is the story about? What do people want in the story? What are they after? Because that's going to determine how you interpret the image. And these series of questions at the end are to get you to think about symbolism in general. These are some things that we've talked about in class. What does the color white symbolize? What does the color red symbolize? The sky. What does fire symbolize? I'll leave you to think about that on your own. Thank you.